Tell us about what exactly has been threatened by President Trump and how European leaders have so far reacted.
Yeah, Tom, that was a deep inhale there from you, and I can understand, because if you blinked, you basically could have missed what happened last Saturday night over the weekend when we heard from President Trump, and just detailing precisely what Trump has now done here. He's taken to target those 8 European countries, most of whom have basically sent some kind of military delegation to Greenland. We should say a very symbolic military delegation. We're talking about rather fewer than 40 or 50 soldiers overall, saying that basically all of you are basically contravening my effort to take over Greenland. So these 8 nations, which are Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, will all face 10% tariffs beginning February the 1st for their contribution to basically solidarity with Greenland, and that will ramp up on June the 1st to a 25% tariffs. And now everything that we've heard from European leaders so far out on Twitter, the comments that have been made elsewhere, has been in total unity with Greenland. We also heard from the European Council President, Antonio Costa, who convened an emergency meeting of EU leaders here in Brussels on Thursday, saying that there is unity on the principles of international law, territorial integrity, unity in support and solidarity with Denmark and Greenland, readiness to defend themselves against any form of coercion, and of course readiness to continue to engage constructively with the U.S. on all issues of common interest. So that emergency meeting will be taking place here in Brussels on Thursday, convening all of these European leaders to try to figure out what their collective response would be. We should say that in the last hour, we have also heard from Donald Trump out on Truth Social, saying that NATO has been telling Denmark for 20 years that you have to get ready for the Russian threat away from Greenland. Unfortunately, Denmark has been unable to do anything about it. Now it is time, and it will be done. So Donald Trump really ramping it up over the last hour. We've also heard now from the last few minutes from the Swedish Prime Minister, says that we will not be blackmailed. Only Denmark and Greenland will decide matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. I will always stand for my country and for our allied neighbors. The EU will stand firm.
OK, yeah, the economic coercion and the response to that. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as well, Ollie, seen by many investors as kind of the adult in the room when it comes to the Trump administration, isn't backing down on these threats. Let's take a listen to what he's been saying.
If there were an attack on Greenland from Russia, from some other area, we would get dragged in. So better now, peace through strength, make it part of the United States, and there will not be a conflict, because the United States right now, we are the hottest country in the world. We are the strongest country in the world. The Europeans project weakness. The U.S. projects strength.
Ollie, what happens to the US-EU trade deal in this situation?
Yeah, the ironies, of course, Tom, is that if the Europeans actually sort of roll over and give in to the United States, they will be projecting weakness, and that will be sort of satisfying exactly what Scott Bessent is talking about there versus on their weakness versus Greenland. I think the real question for European leaders here is, where is the red line for Europe? They have basically rolled over and given the Trump administration everything they want so far over the last year. The question is this Greenland question a step too far? The European Parliament is supposed to vote on the trade deal that was agreed with the United States back in July. That was supposed to happen 10 days from now. That is likely not going to happen, Tom. That's not necessarily been officially stated, but there's not a way in which they can vote on this deal, get it through, while the United States is effectively threatening another trade war. We've heard also from Emmanuel Macron, who has been sort of quick on the draw of the anti-coercion instrument. This is a sort of new instrument that was devised by the European Union in order to be able to retaliate against, effectively, Trump and the United States if ever there were another trade war. And that would basically give the EU powers to act very swiftly in retaliating against trade with the United States, but also against tech companies, procurement contracts, that sort of thing. So that is certainly on the table. And then there are, of course, these measures, the retaliation measures that the EU came up with last year that have actually been put on ice. They have never been officially kind of totally withdrawn. And there was another decision to be made on that on February the 6th. And that is basically now a very live deadline, because if the Trump administration moves forward on February the 4th on these sort of February the 1st on these decision to actually impose tariffs on the Europeans will be considering the ways that they retaliate. For the time being, they want to negotiate. They want to keep the discussion active. Obviously, Trump is in Davos this week, so they're hoping to take that opportunity to have those conversations with the President of the United States. But at the end of the day, this may be the red line for the Europeans, where they say basically enough is enough. We will retaliate if you do not sort of come to the table in this discussion. Of course, Tom, that carries a great economic risk, to say nothing of the risk that it carries for Ukraine and the support for the United States. But that's going to be all part of the calculus for these European leaders as they meet on Thursday.